Hey guys, tonight we wash up on the edge of a granite beach, strewn with kelp and driftwood, half drowned and trembling under a sky the color of slate. The surf roars like an angry beast, hurling wayward logs and curling foamy fingers onto the shore. You taste salt in your mouth, feel the sting of cold wind against raw skin, and realize there's no one around, no rescue boats, no distant lights, just the endless rise and fall of waves. A tidal pool shimmers at your feet, reflecting broken clouds and the first embers of moonlight. You scrape yourself free of wet sand, heart racing with dread and a spark of determination. Your pack is waterlogged, your maps are legible only in blurred ink, and the only thing you can hear is the cry of gulls overhead. Yet somewhere beneath the pounding adrenaline, a single thought pierces your panic: survive. In the soft hush between waves, you sift through drifting debris, a ripped tarp, a half-buried knife, a smashed water bottle. Each item is a fragment of hope. You hold them up, one by one, letting your breathing steady as you begin to plot your next move. You probably won't survive this, unless you fight back. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Everyone, please leave a comment about any of your stories for me to know. Now take a seat, have a warm cup of tea, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rocky shore yawns before you like a yawning mouth of stone. You press your back against a weathered boulder, closing your eyes to count your breaths. Survival trembles at the edge of your mind: water, fire, food, shelter. Without fresh water, you'll be dead in days. Without fire, hypothermia will grip you when the temperature plummets. Without food, your strength will ebb until every step is agony. And without shelter, the elements will tear at your bones. Your knife blade flickers in the half-light as you begin scavenging. You break apart tangled branches, testing their flexibility for a makeshift shelter frame. A rotted log offers workable planks. You yank half of your soaked shirt to fashion cordage. Every motion tastes of necessity and fear. When the wind slices across your shoulders, you shiver and remind yourself you've done hard things before. You drag your arms over jagged rocks until the sun's first pale glow creeps over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery golds. In that moment, isolation feels absolute. No radio crackles, no footprints over the sand but yours. Every echo of wave and cry of seabird reverberates through your bones. Yet beneath the dread, a fierce spark of resilience ignites. You steel your jaw and hoist yourself to your feet. This island, or whatever stretch of wilderness you've stumbled into, will not break you. You drag your feet through wet sand toward a rocky inlet where tide pools promise tiny crustaceans and perhaps the whispers of fresh water seeping from fractured stone. As you stumble forward, leg muscles quivering, your mind whirls with plans. You'll mark landmarks with piled stones. You'll search for streams or sap dripping from pines. You'll break open mussel shells with rock shards to taste protein. You'll light a fire or freeze without shamed effort, and you'll never lose sight of the sky, scanning for any flicker of rescue. But for now, this moment, heart-pounding lungs, heaving skin slick with salt, is your baptism. You stand alone on a stranger's shore, battered by elements and hope intertwined. With each breath, you summon one word: survive. Dawn's mist clings to my skin as I force myself inland, each step a battle against paralyzing thirst. My tongue feels swollen, sticky, as if glued to the roof of my mouth. I scrub at my lips with the back of my hand, tasting only grit and salt. The world ahead is a tangle of bracken and moss-laden boulders, each darker, more silent than the last. I know I need water now, or this adventure ends here. Pushing through a thicket of alder, I spot a hollow in the granite bedrock, rainwater, trapped in a shallow pool. I drop to my knees, cupping palmfuls and draining them in greedy gulps, but it's lukewarm and tainted by rotting needles. I cough, choking on forest detritus, and my mind burns with frustration. One sip won't be enough to keep me alive. I recall the solar still trick I watched in a survival doc: dig a pit, line it with plastic, collect condensation. My tarp is ripped, but I rip off a sleeve of my shirt, weave it into a makeshift liner, and jury-rig a funnel shape with sticks. I press damp moss against the fabric, hoping it'll wick moisture upward. Sweat drips onto the pit's edges, splattering mud onto my face. Sunlight filters through pale needles overhead, warming the pit, coaxing droplets to bead on the cloth. I lean in, breath held, watching tiny pearls gather and trickle into a carved-out bark cup. Each droplet is an agonizing victory. My pulse slows as I drink the first real water in hours, cool and oddly sweet. Hope flickers fragile as a moth's wing. Revived slightly, I scour the surrounding grove for a hidden spring. Stepping over sinewy roots, I press my palm to cool stone faces, feeling for dampness. A whisper of moisture draws me around a granite outcrop. There, clear rivulets lace the rock like veins. I cup my hands again, grateful tears mixing with brine as I drink until my stomach strains. My mind replays every desert survival story I've ever heard. Hallucinations of dancing mirages, dwindling senses, the cruel lure of false hope. I swallow hard, swallowing fear itself. Each swallow reminds me how close I came to giving up. The forest floor glows golden, now sunbeams slicing through foliage like spotlight beams. In this surreal light, the island seems to pulse with hidden life. Refilled, I build on my pit design, carving a shallow trench toward the spring and funneling fresh seepage into my pit. My makeshift still hums with potential, an oasis in miniature. My muscles ache, but I refuse to slow scraping at the earth until my fingers bleed. The outcrop above me drips steadily now, a promise that I can drink tomorrow next week. Maybe even escape. As midday heat ripples the air, I collapse against a fallen pine trunk, cupping another sip of water. My pulse steadies, and for a moment I imagine I'm back in a cozy cabin mug of tea steaming in my fingers. A mocking fantasy, but one I cling to. I press my forehead against rough bark, inhaling the scent of resin and wet earth, letting the forest's heartbeat become my own. I wonder, will I find a source deep enough to sustain me for days? Or is this trickle the last gasp of a dying mountain spring? The wind rustles leaves above in a hush, almost like an answer. With renewed determination, I harvest green leaves and thin strips of bark to lash over my pit, magnifying greenhouse warmth. Tiny beads of moisture gather, gleaming in the midday glare. My shirt liner feels cold and slick relief. But as shadows lengthen, I realize thirst is only the start. My body craves more food, warmth, shelter. Yet water is the lifeblood, the first foundation I lay. I gather extra moss and pack the pit in a clear plastic sheet I forge from melted shards of my water bottle, confusing fantasy for resourcefulness. Each piece of technology, knife, shirt, plastic scraps feels sacred now, as if bestowed by some benevolent spirit of the island. I sip again before packing up the bark cup, the shirt liner, the plastic sheet tucked inside a carved-out stump for safekeeping. I feel a crackle of triumph. Tomorrow, with my throat quenched, I'll tackle fire, and then food. Step by step, I claim this wild place. Every drop I collect is a word in my silent declaration, I will survive. My hands tremble as I gather tinder from the forest floor. Dry pine needles, curled birch bark, and a handful of feather-light fuzz from decaying logs. Each fragment feels precious, as if the entire world rests on these tiny scraps. My shirt is plastered with sweat and smudged with mud, but I don't care. The sky is already bruising toward dusk. Without fire, the cold will claim me. I place a handful of needles in a small cradle formed by a split stick, then layer the birch strips above. My ferrocerium wazoo firestarter glints in my grip, deceptively simple, a small rod of ferrocerium attached to a mini striker. I have seen this gadget tear sparks from steel in survival videos, but in my shaking grasp it feels like magic. Tonight I need that spark to blaze hope into reality. I kneel on pine-needled soil, heart pounding so hard it thrums in my ears. My mind flickers through every failure I've ever known, every cold night in a flimsy tent, every time I dropped a match and watched my chance die in a hiss of steam. But this is different. This is life or death. My breath fogs in the cooling air as I cock my wrist, scraping the striker hard along the rod. A shower of white sparks erupts. They drift like dandelion seeds across my nest of tinder. I scramble to cup the largest ember, pulling it close to the dry needles. My first attempt sputters a puff of smoke and nothing more. My chest tightens, fear crawling up my spine. I steel my nerves and strike again, faster, harder, tipping the ember into the heart of the nest. A thin wisp of smoke spirals upward, slender as a silver thread. I hold my breath, heart hammering. The tinder glows hot and alive. I blow gently at the base, coaxing breath into flame. The needles flare for an instant and then die back. Frustration claws at me. Fire isn't a myth. It must live. I sacrifice another birch strip, wedging it in as tinder, and strike the ferro rod again. Sparks shower down, one glowing ember striking true. This time the ember catches, burning a thin line through the bark. I blow with cautious patience, feeding the spark. The glow swells, trembling into a tiny flame. My pulse pounds with relief as the flame licks the birch edges. I carefully add slivers of bark, slowly building a pyramid of fuel. The flame grows, flickering against the darkening sky. I pause to feel its warmth on my chilled fingers. Its surreal, raw heat in the cold night, a beacon of triumph carved from sparks. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, tears stinging my eyes. Still, I know small flames are fickle. I gather larger kindling, fallen twigs, whittled sharp points, and dried branches snapped into lengths. I lean them against the growing blaze, conscious of keeping the core shielded from wind. The fire sizzles, flaring, bright, spilling golden light onto mossy stones. I add progressively larger logs, watching the flames writhe and dance, chasing shadows up the trees. As the fire roars to life, I feel a surge of confidence. I sit back on my heels, mesmerized by the flame's choreography. Sparks spiral skyward, joining the first stars twinkling overhead. In the wavering glow, I admire the rough shelter framework. I began earlier, crossed poles lashed with cordage made from shredded shirt fibers. Tonight it will guard me from wind and moisture. I let the fire crackle for a moment, inhaling resinous smoke that smells like promise. My cold toes thaw, and I feel the first real surge of comfort since washing ashore. The firelight reveals patterns on the bark and glints off my knife's blade. I can almost forgive this island for its cruelty. It gives me challenges that force me to grow. Carefully, I maintain the blaze, adding wood in timed intervals so it won't smother or sputter. My arms ache from gathering fuel, but I welcome the exhaustion. It means I'm still alive, still capable. I test the wind direction, shifting logs to control smoke and maximize warmth inside my lean-to. The fire's warmth carries me into a meditative state. I'm no longer battling panic, I'm collaborating with the elements. While the flames dance, I fish my ferrocerium rod from my pocket and scrape off a thin shavings, tucking them into a small pouch for quick sparks in case my main starter is lost. I tuck that pouch beneath my shelter's floorboards, my secret cache for emergencies. Every action is deliberate, every resource precious. The night deepens, and the fire's edges begin to burn down into glowing embers. I rake embers inward, merging smaller coals into a compact bed, ensuring they won't smolder out. Then I stack a fresh armful of logs atop, building a stable pillar that will burn low and slow through the long hours. I sit just beyond the ember heat, gazing into the flames like an old friend. Images flicker in the firelight, snow-lashed clearings, rain-soaked nightmares, and the map home that once seemed so simple. I remind myself fire isn't just heat and light. It's life insurance sanctuary, a signal that someone someday might see. I let out a low vow: I will not freeze. I will not surrender. The warmth permeates my bones, bolstering my resolve. I reach into my pocket, pull out a small tin from my pack, hardtack biscuits saved for emergencies, and break off a piece, chewing it slowly as if it were fine chocolate. It tastes like resilience. Above me, the forest settles into night sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackle of branches under unseen feet. But here, at the center of my firelit circle, I'm insulated. I have beaten the primal battle for flame. I am alive, and the darkness has lost its dominion. As the embers glow red-orange against the black, I trace plans in my mind. Tomorrow I'll fish. The next day I'll refine my shelter. Then I'll try to fashion a signal fire on a high ridge. For now, this blaze is my anchor, the first milestone in my long fight to survive. Dawn's pale fingers stretch across the horizon as I slip from my lean-to, still warmed by last night's embers. My muscles ache with yesterday's toil, but my focus zeroes in on the river's roar just beyond a stand of alders. The water tumbles over moss-slick rocks in furious whitecaps, an untamed ribbon of life. I shiver at its chill, but know I must wrest food from these currents. I scout upstream until a narrower chute offers calmer eddies. Kneeling on damp gravel, I peel slender young saplings from a fallen spruce, each branch about pencil thickness and improbably strong. I strip bark in long ribbons for cordage twisting strands into rough but serviceable twine. The cracked handle of my knife is cold in my hand, but I slip it into a notch I carve in one sapling, fashioning a makeshift hook holder. With deliberate patience, I whittle the tip of a sturdy branch into a barbed spear, 2 lateral hooks cut into its point. So once a fish is impaled, escape is unlikely. In the scrub oak nearby, I tie a snare noose out of my cordage, its loop wide enough to catch a passing trout's flank. Satisfied, I test the tension, then stake the snare into the riverbank at water level, disguising it with pebbles. My heart hammers as I wade ankle-deep into the frigid current, balancing on slippery stones. I grip my spear with both hands, raising it overhead like an ancient hunter. The water churns around my legs, numbing flesh with each heartbeat. I advance slowly, senses sharpened every splash, every glint of silver scales beneath the surface. I freeze mid-step as I spot a shadow flicker in a calmer pool, a trout 20 inches long, triangular head cutting through the glassy swirl. I lower the spear until the tip quivers just beneath the surface, careful not to spook the fish. My breath catches, the world narrows to the gap between my eyes and the trout. Then the current shifts. It pulses against the spear's shaft, threatening to pull it from my grip. My calves burn, straining against the pull of water. I anchor my feet into the gravel bed, feet splaying to keep balance. The trout drifts directly over my snare loop. My chest tightens, every survival manual cautions that snares can spook fish if mislaid. But today I must trust my handiwork. A sudden swirl of claws, know my own hands laying the baited noose, and the loop sinks around the trout's body. It's gone. My snare may be too wide. Frustration flares hot and fierce, and I kick at a rock, sending spray into my face. I retreat to shore, cold water sluicing through my shirt and down my spine. I shake out my cords, then test another snare closer to the pool's tail where the current slackens. I wedge the loop against a submerged root, baiting it with a wiry bit of moss scented by river aromas. I crouch behind a boulder like a warrior stalking prey, heart thudding as I wait. Minutes stretch into eternity. My mind races. If the snare fails, I'll lose another trap and precious cordage. I recall the fishing snare techniques I've practiced in calmer streams, but these churning rapids change everything. I remind myself, adapt or die. I empty a tin of crushed hardtack over the water, scattering crumbs toward the pool's head. Tiny minnows swarm, but the trout darts after them, preening its instincts. When at last I hear the soft snap of my snare loop tightening, my breath catches in my throat. I sprint to the stake, yanking it free. The trout thrashes against the cord fins, raking foam, body arcing in desperate strength. I cradle its flanks with my free hand, careful to avoid the hook's barbs, and lift it onto a flat rock. Its gills flutter in pulsing pink as water drips from mottled scales. A grin splits my chapped lips. I ran a shaking hand over the fish's length, rough, slippery, and alive with possibility. This is protein energy proof that I can feed myself here. I count this triumph as my first real victory on the island. My heart swells with pride and relief. Still, a single fish won't last long. My gaze drifts back upriver, where rocks and shadows promise more chances. I wipe my knife clean on my pant leg and gut the trout, its flesh pale and firm. I hang the carcass from a low branch above my lean-to, knowing that gravity and the river breeze will keep scavengers at bay until I can smoke it. Next, I shift my focus to my spear. I test its balance and sharpen the barbs until they bite into bark with a satisfying screech. I slip the spear into my belt and slide back into the shallows, eyes peeled for more shapes darting beneath the waves. The day is young, the world both threatening and generous. By noon, I've harvested 3 trout, 1 speared, 2 snared, and stacked them by the fire pit. My belly rumbles at each catch. I fry a small fillet in a pat of rendered fat salvaged from emergency rations. The sizzle and steam carry me back to every comforting meal I've ever known. Each taste of fresh fish is a reminder this island can feed me if I persist. The sun climbs overhead, burning away morning mist. I haul in my snares, rethread my cordage, and reset them in deeper pools, experimenting with bait and loop size. Every failure teaches me more about water flow, fish habits, and the river's hidden eddies. My hands bleed from snags on rocks and repeated lashing, but I welcome the pain. It proves I'm alive. When twilight begins its golden descent, I light coals beneath my smoking rack and hang the trout, watching them drip and crisp in the fragrant smoke. The river's lullaby mixes with crackling wood, a harmony of survival. I wrap my arms around myself, satisfied that hunger will rest for tonight. I settle down beside the fire flint, in one pocket, spear in the other, and the rattling current echoing through the night. My gaze follows the river's silver ribbon as it winds toward unknown shores. In this moment, I feel a quiet kinship with the wild currents I've conquered, both powerful, both unforgiving, yet yielding sustenance to those who respect their strength. Morning light filters through spruce boughs as I scout the perimeter of my camp, keen to uncover the island's hidden pantry. My belly grumbles with anticipation. Fish will sustain me, but variety is vital to keep muscles fueled and mind sharp. The forest floor is a mosaic of greens and browns, every patch a puzzle of edibility and risk. One wrong bite and this challenge could turn deadly. I recall a spot near a stand of low-lying shrubs where I glimpsed crimson berries yesterday. Creeping forward, I part delicate branches to reveal a clutch of wild strawberry blight, tiny red orbs gleaming like rubies on dark leaves. I pluck a handful, popping them with a burst of sweet tart juice. Each bite sends a zing through my senses, a welcome contrast to yesterday's hard tack. I stash the rest in a shallow bark container for my evening tea. Moving deeper into the understory, I spy the umbrella-like stalks of cow parsnip. Their thick stems hide a fibrous core that, when peeled, tastes of earthy celery. I break off a length 12 inches long slice, away the outer rind with my knife, and peel back layers. The white inner stalk glimmers crisp as jicama. I nibble a segment, cool, watery, refreshing. I pocket several sticks to cook in tomorrow's stew. Between moss-draped logs, I find garlic-scented clumps of nodding wild onions. Their slender bulbs push through the soil like pale pearls. I tug gently roots, yielding to reveal a fragrant root and ribboned greens. I remove any wilted leaves and bundle them with my forage haul. Their pungent aroma reminds me of home kitchens, grounding my spirit. Overhead, an osprey wheels on thermals, cry echoing like a clarion. I glance to the sky, then bend to unearth a hidden treasure, burdock roots. I dig around a rotting log, displacing soil with my bare hands until I uncover a thick brown taproot. Gripping the blade of my knife, I slice through the dirt-encrusted skin to reveal pale flesh beneath. I trim and slice the root into coins, each piece radiating starchy promise. As I move on, I sense caution. Some plants lie in disguise. I brush against fuzzy nettle clusters and recoil as tiny hairs prick my fingers. I've learned that if I strip the leaves from stalks and cook them, they transform into spinach-like greens. I harvest a few tops, shaking off insects, and tuck them into a cloth bag. Later, I'll steep the nettles in hot water for tea, soothing any aches with their medicinal properties. I pause beside a marshy clearing where tufted cattails stand sentinel. Their brown seed heads resemble corn cobs. I snap off a head climb, a small incline, and dissect the kernels, soft starchy grains nestled in the fibrous matrix. I nibble a few, marveling at their subtle sweetness. I gather 3 heads, knowing they'll cook into a satisfying porridge or be roasted over coals. Further on, my eyes catch lacy leaves of lamb's quarters, deep green foliage sprinkled with white powder. I tug free a handful of young leaves and stems, brushing away any grit. They taste remarkably like cultivated spinach, mild and slightly nutty. I fold them into my foraging sack, my mind cataloging each plant's nutritional value and flavor profile. Behind a granite outcrop, I discover delicate yellow blooms of marsh marigold dotting a seep. I resist snacking, recalling their toxicity unless properly prepared. Instead, I note their location for potential future use of only petals as garnish. Instead, I look down to find horsetail shoots, slender bamboo-like stalks, prized for silica-rich tea. I snap several their stiff segments, breaking cleanly, and store them separately for drying. By late afternoon, my haul rivals a grocery basket: strawberry blight, parsnip sticks, wild onions, burdock root slices, nettle tops, cattail cores, lamb's quarters, and horsetail shoots. I return to camp feeling triumphant, my arms aching but proud. I spread my collection across a flat rock beside the fire pit. A hissing ember greets me as I stoke the coals, readying the flames for cooking and drying. I slice the burdock into thinner strips and lay them on a hot cone of embers to roast, stirring occasionally until they brown and soften. Their starch caramelizes, releasing a sweet earthiness that fills the air. I toss wild onion bulbs next their layers, splitting to reveal fragrant juices. Nettle tops go into a small pot of simmering water, turning emerald green and releasing a savory broth. Cattail cores I skewer on twigs and hold over flames, charring edges into crispness. Between bites of roasted root and sips of nettle tea, I marvel at my own resourcefulness. The forest, once alien and threatening, has revealed its secrets. Each plant offers nutrients, each flame revival of embers offers warmth. Salvation tastes like smoky parsnip, feels like hot nettle infusion warming my throat, and looks like golden light dancing on leaves. Before dusk, I pour my remaining water into a small hollowed-out bark bowl and steep strawberry blight and horsetail, creating a sweet, grassy tea. It steams in the fading light, a soothing tonic for sore joints. I cradle the bowl, inhaling honeyed aroma as stars flicker overhead. My heart swells with gratitude. Food is no longer a distant hope. It is my companion. The island's veil lifts, revealing a pantry of surprises. I tuck the remainder into bark pouches, hanging them from poles to keep critters at bay. As night falls, I settle beside the fire, reckon the day's misshapen scars, scrapes, insect bites, sore muscles, and salute them as badges of my determination. Tomorrow I'll return upstream to refill my smoked fish supply, but tonight I feast. In the mingling glow of embers and twilight, I taste victory. The first rain falls, just as I tighten the final lashings on my shelter, a simple lean-to of boughs and bark nestled against a fallen spruce. I press my palms into the muddy floor, smoothing a bed of pine needles until they form a fuzzy mattress beneath my back. Above interlaced branches, weave a canopy that shimmers under droplets, channeling rainwater along sloped beams. Each leaf drip is a reminder that comfort here is temporary, earned with effort. A sudden gust rattles the canopy. Water sluices along the main ridge pole and splashes onto my tarp, which I've stretched taut as an inner liner. I fling myself to my feet and shimmy inside the scented steam of damp wood rising around me. My shirt is soaked through, clinging cold against my skin. I kick off muddy boots and slip into a dry scrap of cloth. I set aside a makeshift dry layer as precious as gold. Outside, thunder rumbles low and the wind lashing the trees sounds like savage applause. I hunch by the fire, my anchor against the storm, urging flames to burn hotter, wider. I carefully push a half-burned log inward barrier against the wind's chill. Sparks spray skyward, caught in the downpour's glow, like phosphorescent fireflies dancing amid the rain. I retrieve my coat, soaked but salvageable, and drape it over a sturdy branch, close to the blaze, rotating it as needed to dry. Steam curls from the fabric, carrying the sharp tang of wet wool into the air. Each rotation is a small victory over hypothermia's creeping threat. My fingers stiffen, but I force them to work, trussing damp gear to keep the wind from tearing it away. The rain intensifies, drumming on the canopy in an unrelenting rhythm. The forest transforms into a living cathedral of water. Rivulets course down every surface. I run my hands along the shelter's interior ceiling gaps with moss and bark strips. A steady trickle seeps past one joint, so I press a patch of birch bark over it, securing with vine cordage. Moments later, water beads and drips harmlessly away. Inside, my refuge, fatigue, crashes over me like a wave. My muscles tremble from days of carving, hauling, and endless vigilance, yet I resist the urge to collapse. Rest must wait until the storm abates. Instead, I kindle a low, constant flame beneath the center of my shelter and nestle as close to it as I dare without singeing needles. The firelight flickers across glistening walls, illuminating my knife spear, and the smoked trout hanging overhead proofs of my tenacity. The wind shrieks through gaps in the bow ceiling, but the shelter holds firm. I wrap my coat tighter and dip into my rations a sliver of smoked trout and a cube of hard tack. The salty fish dissolves on my tongue, its smokiness a nostalgic warmth against the storm's chill. I chew deliberately, savoring each bite and letting it fortify my resolve. Thunder cracks and the shelter shudders as if flexing its own ribs. I lay a hand on the main support pole, feeling it pulse with life. I murmur thanks to this fallen giant for shielding me. Then I recall every failure so far, tinder soaked through snares, lost to currents, rasping coughs from chilling water, and marvel at how each mistake refined my skill and steeled my spirit. As rain hammers on, I gather wet tinder scraps, birch bark soaked but workable, and stoke my fire with quick bursts of oxygen, coaxing flames through moisture. The fire sputters but roars back to dominance, a living pledge that shelter and warmth can withstand nature's fury. A plume of smoke spirals up and exits through a small vent I carved in the overhead tarp, a silent signal rising in the storm's heart. I shift logs to form a windbreak, blocking gusts that threaten to fan the blaze into uncontrolled fury. Then I crouch beside the fire, pressing both palms to the glowing coals, absorbing heat as if charging a battery for tomorrow's trials. Steam drifts off my coat and hair, mingling with smoke in an otherworldly swirl. Time becomes elastic in the storm. Drops drum a relentless tattoo overhead, while my eyelids grow heavy. I wait until the final sheets of rain lighten to a mist before sliding into my bedding of needles. The shelter's floor is dry, my coat is warmish, and the fire's embers glow steady. I wrap myself in a spare tarp scrap, creating a cocoon of safety. Lying there, I listen to the forest's lullaby, the gentle drip of water from leaves, the crackle of dying embers, the distant adagio of wind. My body aches, but beneath the ache lies gratitude. I whisper to the night I am alive and let the fire's warmth cradle me into a dreamless half-sleep. As the storm's fury fades to a hush, I drift off confident that my shelter has protected me and taught me its secrets. Tomorrow I will emerge victorious, ready to tackle the next challenge. The forest holds its breath as dusk bleeds into night, painting every trunk and boulder in inky silhouettes. I'm crouched beside the dying embers of my fire, patting out glowing coals so they won't flare up uncontrollably in the dark. My spear lies within reach, its barbed tip glinting dimly. My ears strain for the familiar crack of tinder or the distant hiss of water, but instead, I catch the soft, deliberate padding of a large animal moving just beyond my shelter's faint halo. My heart pounds in my throat. The stories of grizzlies roaming these woods flicker through my mind like horror reels. I remind myself I'm a guest in this domain. I press my back against the shelter's rear support, folding in on myself to minimize silhouette. Breath shallow, I inch my hand toward the spear knuckles, white against the weathered wood. The padding grows closer. My eyes slide along the dark understory, searching for movement. Moonlight filters through broken clouds, revealing slender shafts of silver. And then I see it, a massive brown shape lumbering beside a fallen cedar. Rippling muscles shift beneath shaggy fur. Its dark muzzle sniffs the air, nostrils flaring as it catches my scent. I freeze, mind whirling. Attack could come in a heartbeat. Every survival guide urges avoidance, no sudden movements, no direct eye contact. I recall that the bear likely just wants food, not a fight. I slowly roll onto my side, pressing my face into the floor's pine needle bed, keeping my profile as low as possible. My left hand curves around the spear shaft, ready to jolt it forward if the beast approaches the fire. Outside, the bear's heavy breaths mingle with the wind's whisper through treetops. Its claws rasp against fallen branches, a sound that echoes like deliberate footfalls. I still can't see its eyes, but I feel its gaze burning holes through the thin wall of my shelter. Cold sweat beads on my brow. My mind flashes to the trout I hung, to smoke the foraged roots and berries, the sense of dinner that must attract predators. I silently thank the universe that I dangled them high enough to keep small animals away, but I fear a grizzly could reach them with ease. Time dilates, seconds stretch into minutes. Breathing slows as I force myself to stay calm. Every muscle tenses at the brink of panic, but I focus on the bear's rhythm, inhale, step, exhale, step. I remind myself to keep my movements minimal, to speak only if necessary. I close my eyes, summoning a steady heartbeat. A mantra whispers through my thoughts: do not run, do not scream, do not fight. Instead, I reach for my ferrocerium rod and striker tools I've come to rely on, and I quickly but quietly scrape shavings onto a flat stone, prepping an ember in reserve. If the bear breaches my shelter, a sudden spark and flare might startle it or serve as a last-ditch signal to any distant rescuers. A gust of wind shifts the rain-soaked pine needles above, sending a soft cascade onto my tarp. The noise distracts the bear for a moment. I scent the stir of its ears, a flicker of curiosity. In the half-gloom, I swear it tilts its head as though sizing up my hideaway. I force myself to swallow past a parched throat. If I speak, my voice must be calm low. Survival experts say to make oneself appear larger. I drag a fallen branch toward me, extend it outward to widen my silhouette. I pull out my emergency whistle and click it once, soft but distinct. The bear growls a low rumble that quakes the ground beneath me. I click again. The silence that follows is absolute. Then the bear sniffs the air, shifts its weight. Another step, and it pauses behind a thick fir trunk. I don't know if it's surprised, curious, or weighing its risk, but it hasn't charged. My pulse echoes in my ears as I hold the spear in both hands, tip angled upward. My makeshift shelter seems too fragile to stop a bear, but confidence rises in my chest. I have prepared. The bear pivots, massive shoulders flexing. In the silver sliver of moonlight, I catch the flash of its eyes, amber orbs reflecting dread and wonder in equal measure. A seconds-long standoff stretches before us. Then, as if deciding I'm not worth the effort, it turns away, lumbering deeper into the forest with a rustle of needles and bark. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My muscles unclench, shoulders slumping in relief. The forest seems to exhale too, settling back into its nighttime hush. My spear clatters softly as I lower it. A few sparks drift from my ember pouch, reminding me that fire still burns or can be rekindled at a moment's notice. As the bear's heavy steps fade, I crawl out of my lean-to and stand under the moon's pale glow. My boots sink into damp soil, and I draw a shaky breath of crisp night air. I marvel that I'm alive, facing primal fear and standing firm. I thank the ranger skills buried deep in muscle memory. How to posture, how to speak, how to resist the urge to bolt. Back in my shelter, I stoke the embers to life, coaxing a small flame to burn bright against the dark. The crackle of wood feels triumphant now, fire and shelter held against a creature born of these same woods. I hang my coat closer to the blaze, drying chilled fibers, and unwrap a small chunk of smoked trout. Chewing slowly, savoring every smoky note, I feel gratitude not only for food and fire, but for the thin line I've walked between predator and prey. With the night's adrenaline ebbing, I crawl into my bed of needles, wrapping the spare tarp around me like a blanket. My heart still races, but I let the warmth of the small flame lull me. Tomorrow, I'll venture farther, knowing the woods harbor both sustenance and danger. Tonight, I learned respect and caution, two of the greatest gifts this island can offer. As I drift towards sleep, the flickering firelight dances across my closed eyelids. The forest outside murmurs its nighttime secrets, an owl's distant call, the rustle of small mammals, and the wind's whispered lullaby. I press my cheek against my arm, smiling at the day's hard-earned lesson. Sometimes survival means standing still and letting nature choose its path. First light of dawn strains through the smudge of last night's smoke as I hustle to rebuild my smoking rack. The trout I hung yesterday are firm to the touch, their skins taut and tinged with amber. I retrieve a handful of spruce boughs, fresh resinous wood, ideal for generating thick aromatic smoke, and layer them beneath the fish. Carefully, I arrange rocks around the base to contain the embers, then breathe life back into the coals with a gentle blast from my small tinder pouch. Soon, wisps of blue-gray smoke billow upward, curling around the hanging trout. The scent is pungent and sweet, promising preservation beyond today's meal. I step back to admire my handiwork, knowing that successful smoking will buy me days of safe protein. With the rack secured, I pack my spear and snares into a makeshift sling strapped across my back, and set off toward the rocky ridge above camp, my chosen lookout and signal point. The ascent is arduous. I clamber over moss-coated boulders and duck beneath low-hanging branches, each handhold tested for stability. Earth and gravel shift beneath my boots, sending pebbles rattling into shaded crevices. My lungs burn with effort, but I welcome the burn. It signifies life coursing through me. As I climb, I scan the sky for clouds. Today's weather will determine how well my signal fire performs. Nearing the ridgetop, I pause at a narrow ledge overlooking a sweeping valley. A river glints below, and beyond the forest stretches unbroken to jagged peaks, touched by lingering snow. My heart swells at the sight, a living tapestry of life and challenge. Yet a distant rumble reminds me that weather is shifting. Dark clouds coil on the horizon like gathering beasts. I set down my pack and unpack a length of green cordage woven from bark fibers. With quick, practiced fingers, I lash together a spray of dry pine twigs into a compact bundle. This will serve as my tinder for the signal fire in a pinch. The smoldering pine will send sharp plumes of smoke skyward. I gather additional kindling into small piles, broken branch ends, dried grass, and shredded bark. Now comes the moment of reckoning. If I can ignite a smoldering column of smoke visible from the air, perhaps rescuers will spot it. If not, the effort will still warn any passing ship's crew to avoid these treacherous shores. I arrange the tinder bundle atop a flat perch of rock, creating a small chimney with 3 upright stones to concentrate airflow. My heart hammers as I strike the ferrocerium rod, showering sparks onto the twisted bark shavings. The tinder smokes, then bursts into reluctant flame. I blow, gently coaxing the spark to life, mindful that too much oxygen will produce a flame, not the dense smoke I need. Soon, a thin pillar of white smoke rises, followed by thicker coils as the bark and grass smolder. I feed small bits of pine onto the smolder, watching amber embers glow beneath the grey veil. Each addition brings more smoke first, wispy then robust, pouring toward the sky in deliberate waves. The wind catches it and funnels it upward, where it catches sunlight and becomes a beacon. I step back, heart racing, scanning the valley floor for any sign of movement. Hours pass in tense vigil, the signal smoke wanes then flares anew when I shove fresh twigs into the base. My eyes sting from smoke and my arms ache, but I refuse to relent. At midday, the sun hides behind brooding clouds and the smoke turns steely grey, perfect contrast. I imagine pilots cresting the ridge from above, spotting my message etched in the sky. Between sessions of stoking the fire, I examine my surroundings for improvements. I notch a sturdy branch into a makeshift tripod and suspend a small pot of water over the smoldering coals, allowing steam to rise with the smoke, a secondary signal that any pilot would notice glinting in sunlight. The steam crackles as droplets hiss onto the hot rock, mingling with smoke into a swirling column. My stomach aches with hunger, but I resist cooking more fish here. The signal must remain day-long. Instead, I peel a few strips of hard tack and chew them slowly, washing them down with cool water from my skin-lined cup. I savor each crumb as though it were a feast. By late afternoon, the clouds break and shafts of sunlight pierce the smoke, spotlighting it like a cathedral's beam. I allow myself a small smile, imagining rescue craft edging closer. Exhaustion presses into my bones, but adrenaline fights back. I refill the tinder chamber and stoke the coals for another round, determined to keep the signal alive until dusk. As the sun dips low, painting the horizon in bruised purples and fiery reds, the signal fire remains steadfast. The smoke's color deepens against the twilight, and I can almost believe I see a distant silhouette glide across the sky. My breath catches, but I remind myself until I see wheels or rotors, I cannot be certain. Securing the sight, I extinguish the coals with careful tamping of soil, leaving only smoldering embers to reignite at dawn. I collapse beside the remaining rocks, wiping sweat and smoke from my eyes. The return climb to camp is slower, legs rubbery, with fatigued shoulders aching under my pack. Back at the lean-to, I stoke the final embers of my campfire, using residual coals to reheat a piece of smoked trout. The aroma is heavenly. I chew slowly, letting the smoky flavor seep into quivering muscles. My mind replays the day's trials, rising signal smoke gathering kindling, battling wind and rain. Each moment a testament to relentless effort. I wrap myself in my coat and sit beside the fire, waiting for the final glow of smoke to fade from the ridge. Stars begin to twinkle overhead, and I wonder, did anyone see it? Has hope become reality? Before sleep, I whisper to the night, tomorrow they'll find me. I crawl into my needle bed, letting the warmth of embers lull me into dreams of home and rescue. A dawn chill lingers when I step outside. Grey clouds have massed overnight, and the air tastes of frost. I peer up into woolly masses that churn ominously above the ridge. No sooner do I shoulder my pack than the sky erupts, icy pellets hammer my shelter with staccato ferocity. My lean-to rattles as hail pelts the bark roof, each impact a staccato drumbeat that shakes my heart. Instinctively, I dart beneath the shelter's eaves, pressing my back against the main support as shards of ice ricochet off branches. The storm's sudden cruelty reminds me how tenuous my victory over the elements truly is. My coat, already limp from yesterday's rain, grows heavy with ice. Beads of sleet cling to fabric, weighing it down until every movement feels like wading through cold molasses. I rip my coat free and stumble back to the fire pit, where embers from last night's signal still glow faintly beneath ash. I cup my hands over the embers, inhaling sulphurous warmth that sears frostbitten fingertips back to life. Without hesitation, I grab a handful of spruce boughs, the same resinous branches I used to smoke trout, and pile them onto the coals. Flames roar upward, a defiant beacon against the storm's wrath. Back at the shelter, I yank open the flap and shove burning sticks into the center, careful to maintain space so sparks don't ignite needles overhead. Smoke coils around soaked timbers, stinging my eyes, but it helps repel moisture. I then retrieve my drying coat and drape it high across the ridge beam, higher than last night to catch maximum heat. I turn slowly, letting the heat penetrate every soaked layer. Hail rattles like marbles dropped on metal. I press my forehead to the shelter's inner wall, closing my eyes for a moment, and feel every shudder of each icy strike. My mind races through repairs I made. Moss seals, birch bark patches, vine lashings. Will they hold? When the wind shifts, I hear a sharp snap, the aged branch forming. My lean-to's spine has cracked under pressure. Adrenaline surges. I shove my hands into my belt pouch and produce a length of cordage woven from inner bark strips. I yank loose the rope-like bundle and dash outside into the hailstorm limbs burning from cold shock. Gripping a fallen spruce limb, I wedge it beneath the fractured branch, fashioning a brace. My breath clouds in the frigid air as I lash the support with frenzied knots, praying it will hold the roof's weight and the next barrage of ice. The sky lightens when the hail transitions into sleet, sharp pellets that hiss as they strike my skin. I hunch over the brace, hammering each lash tight. By the time my fingers go numb, the sleet has softened into drizzling rain. I collapse against the awaiting warmth of the fire hair plastered to my forehead and boots squelching with icy water. Inside the shelter, I breathe in steam rising from my coat, feeling rivulets of warmth undo the worst of the chill. I gather small bundles of birch bark strips I pried off yesterday and press them into leaky gaps in the roof. A thin tremor of hope returns as water beads and runs harmlessly past my patched seals. The forest beyond is a ghostly world of dripping branches and mist, every leaf glittering with moisture. I realize my clothes are still dangerously damp, so I rotate them once more above the fire, concentrating on collar and sleeves, where wind can creep inside. My shirt and spare cloth layer I hang from crossbeams, turning each garment to expose fresh, wet surfaces to heat. Hunger claws at my belly, but I can't risk cooking fish here. Flames might consume scorched needles and collapse my shelter. Instead, I break off a piece of smoked trout and nibble it, slowly savoring its smoky saltiness as I control my shivering. I brew nettle tea in a cracked tin cup, inhaling the herbal steam that soothes aching limbs. Emboldened by regained warmth, I examine the shelter's floor. The pine needle mattress has become a sodden sponge, ripe for mold if left. I rake out sodden layers and replace them with fresh needles I harvested from under a dry canopy tree stump. Each handful is a brush with freshness, tiny springs of optimism in this sodden domain. As midday passes, the storm relents into persistent drizzle. The sky peels back in ragged sheets and pale sunrays begin to pierce the gloom. I fan embers into life, once again coaxing a solid flame that banishes damp chill from my bones. Flames lick birch patches and moss seams, sealing any remaining leaks with heat and resin. With the worst of the tempest behind me, I salvage my spear and snares, ensuring no vital gear was lost or damaged. The brace holds strong, and the roof has weathered its trial by ice. I step outside into the softened light and shake out my boots, dumping clods of icy sludge onto the dripping forest floor. To reclaim morale, I build a small spit from sharpened sticks and roast leftover burdock root and onion bulbs over the revived fire. The sizzling aroma lifts my spirits. Food again feels like a balm to both body and mind. I chew thoughtfully, feeling energy return with each taste. Before evening, I gather fresh tinder from higher branches where sleet couldn't reach, storing it for emergencies. I sweep the shelter floor clean and add fresh needles for bedding. My coat now mostly dry drapes from the ridgepole like a flag of triumph. As twilight draws near, I light a modest fire inside and settle beneath the canopy. Raindrops still daringly drop from leaf tips, but my shelter stands steadfast. I sip nettle tea, letting warmth trickle through me. My muscles ache, but the ache is pride testament to survival's refined art. The sky clears to reveal a sliver of moon, and the forest exhales in nocturnal calm. I curl into my bed of needles, wrapping the dry coat around me. The storm has tested me, and I have endured. Tomorrow I will press on untouched by youthful confidence, tempered by the icy fury of the wild. Night drapes the forest in a cloak of obsidian as I slip from my shelter with nothing but the silver glint of a headlamp beam guiding me. The air hums with cicada chorus, and my breath sends ghostly puffs into the gloom. Dinner supplies from yesterday won't last forever. I need a steady lifeline, and that means perfecting my setline trap. I move to the riverbank where I first spotted the trout. Moonlight pools on swirling eddies as I kneel among wet stones, unpacking my cordage and sharpened twigs. I survey the water's edge, searching for a spot where current slackens against a submerged boulder, a natural pinch point where a passing fish can't escape once caught. I recall how my earlier snares misfired loops too wide or too taut, spooking wary trout away. Tonight I will adjust every flaw. I start by fashioning a Y-shaped stake from a sturdy sapling, splitting its fork until each arm curves upward, just wide enough to cradle a length of twisted bark cordage. I carve a notch at the fork's base, then cup a shallow depression in the riverbed gravel, ensuring my trap sits flush with the flowing water. I lay the cordage across the notch, tying a small sliding loop no more than 2 inches in diameter. The size is critical, tight enough to cinch around a fish's midsection, but loose enough to let it swim in before the trap snaps shut. Next comes the tether, a length of cord stretching back to shore, knotted around the Y-stake's base, and anchored under a firmly wedged stone to prevent pull-through. I braid a short leader of finer twine at the loop's end, tying on a miniature barbless hook improvised from a fishbone. Barbless so the line won't snag on debris, but angled so the fish feels enough resistance to trigger the loop's pull. I bait the loop with a moist piece of smoked trout fat, the oily scent swirling in the current like a beacon to my targets. Heart pounding, I ease the loop into a stealthy position, half submerged, disguised by shifted gravel and a light sprinkling of moss. I hold my breath as I press a thin twig atop the loop, locking it in place like a mousetrap's trigger. The slightest tug will release the mechanism, cinching the loop in a flash. I press my hand flat against a nearby rock, feeling the water's pulse, attuning my senses to every ripple. With a final nod to my handiwork, I slip back to shore, winding the tether into a coil I secure on a branch above the high water mark. I test the line's slack, ensuring it's taut enough to signal a catch, but loose enough to avoid tangling in fallen logs. Then I retreat into the shadows of the tree line, lighting a small lantern I rigged from a hollowed conch shell and moss wick. Its glow is dim, a compromise between visibility and stealth, so as not to spook nocturnal wildlife or draw unwanted attention. I settle on a fallen log a dozen yards from the bank, spear and knife within reach, and strain my eyes on the river's gleaming surface. Crickets tick in the underbrush, a distant owl hoots, and my heart thrums like a war drum. Time stretches interminably. I remind myself of every survival rule: patience is skill, and traps are only as good as the care invested in them. 30 minutes pass. I shift uncomfortably as sweat cools on my skin. My lantern gutter flickers, then steadies. Suddenly I see it, a faint swirl of movement where moonbeams strike the water. A fish's silhouette glides toward my snare, zigzagging in search of crustaceans. It hesitates at the loop's edge, then darts away, spooked. My chest tightens, but I stay still, refusing to fret, as I inhale the woodsy night air. 10 more minutes. My finger tightens on a musket trigger of nerves. Then I catch it, a silver dart, weaving into my loop scales, flashing like quicksilver. My breath hisses out as the loop slips from its twig trigger. The cord snaps tight with a crisp snap, and the fish thrashes against the tether, sending ripples across the moonlit pool. I leap to my feet, lantern high, and sprint to the bank. The trout bucks in a frenzy, tugging the cord with frantic strength. I wrestle it in, wedging my foot against a rock and drawing it close. My heart soars as I lift the loop and cradle the fish's still warm body in my hands. It trembles, gills pulsing pink as water drips from mottled flanks. Joy floods through me. This is the lifeline I've been chasing. I gut the trout with swift precision, filleting 2 plump halves before threading them onto a green sapling I sharpened earlier. I thrust the spit between forked sticks I pressed into the ground and turn it slowly over the embers of a small campfire. I lit with ease, my fire skills now honed to a reflex. The flesh sizzles and the smoky aroma swells like a celebration. While the trout cooks, I reset my trap, refining the loop's tension and repositioning it in a deeper eddy. I rebait with fresh fat and add a tiny slice of burdock root, sweet and fragrant, to diversify the scent. Then I settle back, confident that the loop will hold until dawn. As I savor the first bite of warm trout, I savor more than flavor, I taste victory over uncertainty. The protein floods my veins, melting exhaustion. Moonlight glints off my tools neatly arranged beside me, knife, spear, hook, and I reflect on how each discovery, each failure led me here. The forest no longer feels alien. It feels like a proving ground where adaptability and calm win the day. When the last ember dims, I gather coals into a small brazier to cook the remaining fillets. I wrap the meat in birch bark and slip it into my pack for tomorrow's journey. Then I extinguish the fire, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke, and slip into my lean-to with a belly full and a heart light with purpose. Before sleep claims me, I check the tether's slack one more time. I wind the excess cord around my wrist like a talisman, a promise that by dawn dinner will find me. I lie back on my pine needle mattress, spear at hand, and let the steady hiss of night insects lull me into a restorative sleep, assured that my baited lifeline is working through the darkness. Moonlight drips through the canopy as I slip from my shelter eyes, straining to see the forest floor in silver-grey hues. It's the hush before dawn, the hour when nocturnal creatures fade and the world holds its breath. Tonight, I trade fish and fire for plants and stealth, creeping through ghostly undergrowth to forage under the cloak of darkness. I move toward a low-lying marsh where cattails once stood sentinel. Now, under the moon's glow, their fuzzy heads sway like silent sentries. I kneel in the mucky edge mud, squishing between my toes, and harvest tender shoots of horsetail. Each segmented stalk snaps with a crisp pop as I slice it near the base, then set aside a bundle for tomorrow's tea. The silica-rich stems will soothe aching joints and calm restless muscles. Deeper in the clearing, I spy the ghostly outline of marsh marigold golden blooms that wink at me like wary jewels. I resist plucking them. I know their petals can be toxic unless properly prepared. Instead, I note their location for potential garnish, pocketing only a single petal as a mental bookmark. Adjacent to the marsh, wild onion bulbs push through soft soil. I uproot a handful of shining pearls, brushing away mud with practiced care. The pungent aroma wafts into the cool air, reminding me of home. I chew a bulb, its fiery bite warming my senses. Their flavor will anchor tomorrow's stew. My lantern's wick sputters as I cross a fallen log into denser woods. I tiptoe around bristly brambles until I reach a grove of moral mushrooms, honeycombed caps rising like ancient toadstools. I pluck each one by the stem, careful not to damage delicate mycelial roots, and nestle them in a bark basket. One false identification here could be fatal, but I've trained my eyes to distinguish these treasures. Their nutty flavor will elevate any meal. Beyond the morels, I find clusters of lamb's quarters, their tender young leaves glistening with dew. I strip several handfuls, marveling at their mild spinach-like taste when tasted fresh. I bind them in a cloth and tuck them into my pack's corner. Overhead, a great horned owl hoots its echo, rolling through dark hollows. My heart leaps as I spot fox tracks in moist earth, evidence of other hunters, and a reminder that I'm not alone. I tighten my grip on my lantern and slip quietly onward, collecting burdock root slices where the soil is looser. Each root smells sweet and earthy, promising starch to bolster tomorrow's breakfast. As I retrace my steps, the lantern's glow reveals a rare sight. Fireweed buds nodding toward the sky, bright pink lanterns unopened until daybreak. I clip several clusters, knowing their leaves steep into a fragrant tea that soothes and uplifts. At camp, I stoke embers from the dying coals and set a small iron pot salvaged from wreckage over the glowing bed. I pour in collected water and add morel mushrooms, lamb's quarters, and onion bulbs. The stew hisses as it simmers, filling the lean-to with earthy perfume. I stand back, savoring the aroma as first light stains the horizon rose. When dawn arrives, I ladle out a steaming bowl. Each spoonful warms me from within tender mushrooms, sweet onion, and green leafy bursts. My body hums with renewed energy. I sip horsetail tea, its subtle flavor grounding me in victory. Between bites, I catalog my haul: horsetail, marsh, marigold petals, wild onions, morels, lamb's quarters, burdock root, and fireweed. Tomorrow, I'll combine roots and tea leaves for sleeping tonic, but tonight I rest with a full belly and a mind sharp as a blade. I spread extra forage across a clean tarp, letting dew settle before drying in the morning sun. Then I snuff the embers, pack my gear, and tuck each foraged treasure into bark pouches hung from shelter poles. As I slip into my needle bed, I reflect on the alchemy of darkness, how the forest's hidden pantry reveals itself to those patient and careful enough to seek. My heart beats steady with confidence. I know this island's secrets, and they will keep me alive. I break camp before first light, packing smoked trout, foraged roots, and tentacles of octopus I happened upon in a tidal pool left by some passing tide or previous castaway's catch. My mission today is to test the makeshift raft I carved from driftwood and paddle upriver in search of a fabled freshwater spring rumored to vanish at low tide. The raft is a simple platform of 3 stout logs bound with vine cordage, crowned by a flat plank of cedar that once served as a signpost. I push it into the water with a grunt, sliding aboard and straddling the logs like a mountain man crossing a dead river. My paddle, whittled from a broken oar I found in driftwood, dips into the current with a smooth pull. The river narrows as I drift past alder thickets and rocky banks. Sunlight dances on ripples, and each stroke hums through the wood into my arms. Upstream, the forest canopy thickens, and the air grows cooler and sweeter. I scan for shoreline roots pulling close when I spot edible cattail rhizomes peeking from silt. I dive in, wading hip-deep, to pry free tubers that will lend starch to tonight's meal. Back aboard, I mount the paddle and guide the raft onward, wary of submerged logs that could rip my brittle craft apart. Currents tug fiercely, testing my balance, but I adapt, shifting weight and leaning into each twist of water. The raft groans but holds. An hour in, I spy a cluster of cow parsnip along a sandbar. I beach the raft and uproot more stalks, slicing them into broad strips. Their crisp flesh will stew well. I also gather a handful of bright red berries from a nearby patch of strawberry blight antioxidants and a burst of sweetness. Pushing back onto the water, I notice the river splits around a mossy islet. I steer toward the narrower channel, heart pounding, as I spy a rock face carved by centuries of flow. At its base, a thin ribbon of water seeps from a crevice, the elusive spring I've hunted. Unloading my raft, I kneel and cup crystal-clear water as it trickles from the stone's mouth. It tastes of minerals and life itself. I sip deeply and refill my skin-lined pouch until it bulges. Refreshed, I collect smooth pebbles and arrange them into a fire ring beside the spring. I kindle a small signal, fire smoke drift curling into the shade as thanks for this gift and to mark my passage. Then, abandoning the raft for the return journey on foot, I load my packs with fresh water tubers, stalks, berries, and a small cache of trout fillets. The trek back is heavier but purposeful. Each step crunches with anticipation of camp comforts. I pause to nibble a parsnip strip, its sweetness mingling with the spring's cool memory. As the forest opens and the river widens, I sight my lean-to across the bend. At camp, I unload my spoils and stoke embers from yesterday's fire. I skew octopus tentacles on a stick and roast them beside trout, their flesh curling into charred spirals that taste briny and tender. I boil spring water in my conch shell pot, steeping fireweed petals and nettle tops for a refreshing brew. Night falls as I sit beside the glow, the rhythm of paddle strokes replaced by steady crackling wood. My belly sings with gratitude, each bite a testament to this land's bounty and my craft. I think of the raft, fragile, strange little ship, and the hidden spring that quenched my deepest thirst. Tomorrow I will carve gears for a more permanent shelter and deepen my signal pit. But tonight I rock between water and flame, content in survival's delicate dance. First light crests the horizon as I descend from the ridge where I tested my signal fire, each step driving home the need for tools that last. Today's quest is carving and rigging survival implements, rod, reel, and spear upgrades to sharpen my edge against this untamed wilderness. My hands ache from yesterday's paddle, but determination spurs me on. I clear a workspace beside my campfire, stacking driftwood logs into a stable bench and selecting the straightest piece of cedar for my next fishing rod. It's about 5 feet long, thick at the handle and tapering to a fine point. I clamp one end under my boot and grip my knife, then shave away bark and knots in long, smooth strokes, revealing pale wood beneath. Splinters curl like ribbons at my feet. The sun warms my back and dries my arms as I work, letting me glimpse muscle and grain. When the rod is smooth and balanced, I fashion line guides by splitting thin willow shoots into half-inch strips. I lash each loop to the rod at regular intervals, using finely braided bark cordage knotting with friction hitches that grip under tension. The loops are small at the tip, larger near the handle, coaxing the line in graceful curves for precise casting. My brow furrows as I test each guide, sliding a length of spare twine through to check for snags. Satisfied, I move to the reel. My improvised reel emerges from a thick spool I carved from a branch stub found long ago. I drill 2 holes through its core, one for the rod, one for an axle, and broach out the center with a sharpened stick until it rotates freely. I notch the spool's rim at regular intervals to anchor line and carve a slender wooden crank handle that fits my palm. I fit the axle, a straight stub of hardwood, through the spool and slot it into notches I carve just above the rod's handle. A simple latch of bent rootwood acts as a drag system, clicking under pressure to prevent line breakage. With rod and reel assembled, I thread fresh monofilament extracted from my water bottle's brittle lining through the guides and tie it to the reel spool with a blood knot. My final test, a flick of the wrist, sending a small twig arching over the riverbank. The line hums and unwinds smoothly, gliding through each guide. A gentle twist of the reel fetches it back without balking. This concocted tool feels alive in my hands, a marriage of ingenuity and necessity. Next, I turn to my spear. The barbed tip served me well, but I crave a more reliable mechanism. I carve a sharp prong from antler I retrieved near the riverbank, fashioning dual barbs for better grip. I drill 2 diagonal holes through the antler base, then lash it to a stout shaft of ash using braided sinew harvested from scavenged deer hide. The binding is layered in tightly coiled turns, sealed with pine resin to harden and waterproof the joint. I test its balance, hurling it with a practiced throw into a carcass of driftwood. It embeds cleanly every time. These tools, rod, reel, spear, are more than wood and cord. They embody resilience and craft. I pause to clean shavings from my workspace, then stow the rod alongside my sleeping area, ready for tomorrow's fishing. I hang the spear within arm's reach, tip upward to ward off nocturnal intruders. The final flourish is a multi-purpose knife sheath carved from thick leather scraps I cured by smoking under copious spruce boughs. I stitch edges with plant fibers and seal seams with pitch, carving a grove along the back to cradle my belt. The knife slides snugly, its grip secure yet accessible. I lean back, surveying my handiwork, a sleek rod gleaming in morning light, a wooden reel poised for action, a spear that bristles with lethal promise, and a knife ready at my side. Each piece whispers of afternoons spent laboring rather than fighting starvation or cold. They are my ambassadors of hope, proof that mastery over nature, however small, carves a path to survival. Satisfied, I pack tools carefully into my pack and refill my water pouch from the spring I piped yesterday, savoring cool clarity. I drift a few droplets onto a leaf and taste the island's promise before heading upriver again. My heart flutters as I lift the fishing rod for its first real test, knowing these implements could mean the difference between feast and famine. I smile, feeling both wood grain textures and cordage fibers, impressing into my fingers the map of my triumphs etched into every groove. The forest awakes around me. Birds peal dawn songs across the canopy, squirrels chatter in elated gossip, and the river's pulse beckons. With tools christened by sweat and skill, I stride toward the next chapter of this survival odyssey, confident that ingenuity can bend even the wildest elements to my will. The sky overhead quivers with pale light as I hoist my gear and climb the craggy slope once more, retracing footsteps toward the signal plateau. My hands are calloused from carving tools and hauling water, but they steady now with determination. Today I must perfect the smoke fire that could spell rescue, my final gamble against endless isolation. Reaching the summit, I pause at the ridge's jagged lip and survey a valley carved by glaciers, its river snaking toward distant peaks. A thin haze of yesterday's signal smoke drifts in my memory, and I vow to craft a column so bold it cannot be ignored. But wind gusts whip across the plateau, threatening to scatter any frail plume I ignite. I scan the rocky outcrop for shelter. Two protruding boulders form a natural lee. I drop my pack and unpack tinder kindling and sap-laden spruce boughs. My heart hammers as I arrange 3 flat stones into a triangular foundation stable against gusty drafts. I carve a shallow depression in the center and line it with dry grass I scavenged from higher branches. On top, I layer shredded bark and wisps of resin-coated pine shavings, my tinder trifecta. Next comes a lattice of small kindling branches, angled like the ribs of a shelter, ready to collapse inward once the flame takes hold. I strike my ferro rod. Sparks scatter one flame-kissed ember, landing in the grass nest. For a heartbeat, it glows only faintly. Then it tastes ember, and a tender flame flickers to life. I blow gently at its core until the grass bursts into an eager blaze. Instantly, I shove fresh kindling inward, coaxing the fire upward. Flames crackle, licking the stone's edges, sending heat rippling through my gloves. Now comes the delicate balance: feed the blaze enough to ignite the damp spruce boughs, but not so much that the fire roars into a dancer's frenzy, consuming itself to ash. I wedge the first resinous bough onto a forked stick and guide it into the fire's heart. Searing resin hisses a torrent of black smoke, spiraling upward in roaring plumes. My eyes sting, but I lean in, feeding 3 more boughs in rapid succession. Each sizzles and smolders, swelling the smoke column into a billowing grey tower. But the wind betrays me. A sudden gust slams the flames sideways, scattering glowing embers and bending the smoke into ragged ribbons. My heart lurches as I lunge to shield the blaze, but the smoke breaks apart, dissipating before it spiders across the sky. Frustration roils in my chest. Time is slipping away. I scramble for larger logs, dragging 2 stout fir timbers from a nearby cluster. I prop them upright around the fire pit, forming a partial windbreak, its jagged tops aimed into prevailing gusts. I wedge more stones at the base, shoring up stability. The wind snarls through the stones, but the faltering smoke finds a path upward in uneven puffs. I crouch low, shielding the center with my body as I stuff more pine shavings into the flames. The fire flares brighter roars between the logs, and for a moment the smoke rises in thick, ghostly columns. Then a rogue gust tilts the structure, and the smoke vanishes again like breath on a mirror. My throat goes dry, and I taste steel. Swallowing frustration, I take a breath and circle the pit, once gathering every scrap of fibrous bark and dry moss within arm's reach. I return with an armful and weave them into the lattice packing gaps that allowed wind to starve the core. My fingers sting from resin and splinters, but I refuse to relent. I strike the ferro rod again, coaxing sparks into the new tinder patches. They catch with stubborn resilience, flickering into flame beneath choking puffs of rain-damp air. This time I feed the fire in a controlled rhythm, a handful of tinder, a breath, then a bough or two, then a pause to let the core settle. The smoke begins to rise steadier, a thick plume surging skyward like a living creature. Solar shafts catch its edges, illuminating it in ashen silver. I step back, heart racing, as the smoke carves a banner across the morning sky. But victory is fragile. The wind whips fiercely, swirling the smoke into eddies that fold back on themselves. I race for a fallen spruce trunk and drag it down to lengthen my windbreak, buttressing the pit's vulnerable flank. Each motion feels desperate carry, prop lash, stoke. Sweat mingles with resin on my brow. As the second windbreak rises, the smoke stabilizes, cascading up in thick, purposeful waves. I add a fresh resin-laden bough, then another, until the forest scent coalesces into a pungent odyssey that thunders upward. My gaze ascends, tracking the column as it pierces a blanket of clouds. For the first time, I allow a flicker of hope. Someone somewhere must see this. But doubt claws at me. What if no one passes this ridge? What if the smoke is too pale, the wind too cruel? I bite back the tremor in my voice and kneel beside the pit, fanning a final handful of ground bark onto the ember bed. The fire surges, roaring like a beast unchained, and the smoke responds in kind, dense, towering, relentless. I shelter behind the windbreak, arms crossed, endurance morphing into reverence. This signal is not a gamble, but my triumph over nature's will. The smoke flares and twists, a living column of defiance. My chest thuds as adrenaline pulses through my veins. I imagine eyes above eyes in airplanes or on high ridges following this smoky thread to its source. Time slips away in waves of anticipation. I refill the firebed twice more each time with fresh resin wood, maintaining the signal until my arms tremble with fatigue. Finally, when the sun breaks a sudden shaft through drifting clouds, I step forward and let the fire subside, bending low to tamp embers into necessity's rest. I stand atop the ridge, watching the last billows drift southeast, my chest heaving with exertion and hope. Behind me, the windbreak stands battered but unbowed. I trail a finger along its stones, feeling each dent and scrape a testament to this fierce dance with the elements. Gathering my tools, I tuck my ferro rod and striker into my belt pouch and test my pack's straps as I descend. Even as fatigue claws at my limbs, pride warms me from within. Yesterday showed me how to catch fish. Today I've learned how to shout into the sky. Back at camp, I rekindle embers in my lean-to's fire pit. The lingering glow, a quiet echo of the grand signal aloft. I hang my carved spear and rest my fishing rod against the bow frame, silent companions in this struggle. As dusk gathers, I watch the ridge's silhouette against the darkening sky, trusting that my smoky beacon remains a promise that I have not given up. In the soft firelight, I tuck into my needle bed and press a hand over my aching ribs. The day's trials have honed more than survival skills. They've sharpened my resolve. I whisper into the embers. They will come, and let the slow fade of light draw me toward sleep, the signal smoke still burning bright in my memory. The morning sun filters through the thinning smoke haze as I clamber back up to the ridge, each step heavy with anticipation. My legs ache, cut and bruised from carving windbreaks and hauling resin-laden logs. The signal fire's last embers glow faintly against the stones I battered into position, but above me, the sky is clear, a canvas of pale blue, streaked with wisps of dissipating smoke. I stand at the ridge's lip, scanning the valley below. The river sparks in sunlight, the forest canopy ripples in breeze, and every element seems to hold its breath. Then a distant roar like thunder born of metal. My heart jolts as I grasp the ridge's edge, peering over a distant peak. A silver shape arcs across the horizon, helicopter rotors slicing through air blades, glinting in bursts of sunlight. "Hello," I shout, voice cracked by days of smoke and strain, lifting one arm in greeting. The chopper banks, hearing my cry. I wave frantically, dropping to one knee to steady myself as tremors roll beneath my feet. Its rotors chop the air into a roar that rattles my bones. Dust and pine needles swirl around me in a spiraling dance. The helicopter circles back, dipping low over the smoking pit as the pilot scans for survivors. I race down the slope, skidding on loose gravel, cradling my finished spear and ratchet reel against my chest. My mind spins with disbelief. Rescue is no longer a dream, but a dizzyingly real moment. The helicopter hovers above the clearing I used for shelter rotor wash, bending trees in reverent arcs. A winch descends a thick cable with a harness swinging at its end. My breath catches. The crew's voices crackle in my earpiece. "We see you, stay clear of trees, and keep waving." I dash beneath the rotor blast to the only flat patch of rock, breathing in the smell of fuel, scorching pine, and hope. My rescue harness clicks tight around shoulders and waist, cold buckles against sweat-slick skin. I glance down at my makeshift tools, rod, reel, spear, each bearing scars and sweat of survival. Then I look up at the rescue crew faces hidden behind helmets and give a thumbs up. Hang tight, a voice booms. The winch whirs, and I'm lifted from the earth, feet dangling above everything I fought for. The world tilts as I rise, and my camp shrinks to a smoke-ringed dot. My heart pins in my chest, a mix of triumph and reluctance. This island has been my crucible, my tutor in the art of survival. The helicopter banks eastward, carrying me over rivers and forests I once thought infinite. Through the open side door, I catch glimpses of my path, smoke pillars still curling upward. Tents and snares left behind, a testament to the days I carved from stone and water. Tears sting my eyes when I recall every sting of nettle, every frigid plunge, every blistering spark that brought me this moment. As we clear the tree line, I lower my gaze to the forest floor, absorbing the view of the place that tested my body and will. The pilot guides us toward a base camp just beyond the mountains, a haven of warmth, medical aid, and a map-lined bunker where rescue teams await. My voice cracks as I mutter a silent vow I will return. When the helicopter touches down on a helipad thick with fresh blankets and hot tea, I feel the ground beneath me pulse with a new reality. A medic rushes forward, wrapping me in warmth and checking wounds. My pack is lifted, and I hand over my tools, my proud trophies of ingenuity, to be documented and preserved. I take a final look back at the mountain ridge visible through the clearing morning haze. A plume of smoke still coils from the signal pit, a silent handshake between survival and civilization. I step forward, each breath a promise that I'm done fighting hunger and storm, but forever changed by this land's fierce lessons. The helicopter's rotors fade into a gentle hum as I settle onto a padded bench, the pilot offering a reassuring nod. Warm blankets cocoon me, their softness a soothing contrast to the rough bark and stone that defined my days here. I cradle a steaming cup of tea in gloved hands, the fragrant steam rising and mingling with the scent of dew-washed pine that clings to my clothes. Outside the helicopter's open doorway, the valley stretches beneath a pastel sky. Peaks glow rose gold in early light, and rivers wind like silver threads through emerald forests. Below, tiny patches of smoke drift upward, remnants of the fires I tended, signals of perseverance etched into the air. Each flicker carries memory, the hiss of embers, the scent of resin and nettle, the flash of trout scales in rushing water. My body relaxes, limbs unfurling from the perpetual tension they held on the ridge. The ache in my shoulders and the stiffness in my legs are badges of endurance, proof that I stood firm when every instinct urged retreat. I close my eyes, letting the helicopter's gentle sway rock me, and feel gratitude settle like soft ash in my chest. Scenes from the island float into my mind, the first strike of flint against steel, birch bark blossoming into flame. The hush before a grizzly's approach, triumphant shouts echoing across the ridge. Each moment taught me something essential, how to coax water from stone fire, from sparks food, from currents and foliage. I realize survival isn't merely a test of strength, but of patience, adaptability, and respect for the wild. A medic's gentle voice draws me back. You did it. You're safe now. I lift my head to meet kind eyes and offer a faint smile. The chaos of rescue fades into calm assurance. I wrap the blanket tighter, feeling its warmth seep into tired muscles. The cup's warmth radiates through my gloves and into my soul like a final ember of that first fire. As the helicopter lifts off again toward warmth and care, I press my forehead against the crook of my arm, watching the island recede. In that moment, I vow to carry its lessons forward, resilience drawn from danger, hope kindled by smoke, and the quiet strength of knowing I emerged alive.